Got some siblings, I'm not really sure if they're like have the same mother. I don't know, like were they birthed from the ether? Like we don't know, it hasn't been explained. Hi, I'm Carly with Bookish Pixie Reads. Thanks for coming back and joining me today. Today I'm covering my wrap up for the month of August of everything that I read. I know technically at this point it is way too late for an August wrap up, but at this point I've shot this video twice and edited it at least 3 times. Now they're gonna see this video. Hope you like it. So I've been doing, all year I've been doing a tally of the authors that I've read, because I've heard some people just like, oh, I only read female authors, or I only, whatever. And I'm like, is that a thing people do? It's not a thing I do, at least not intentionally. And so I wanted to make a list to sort of keep track of like where my diversity levels were. Do I have certain proclivities toward certain things and authors? And so I've started keeping a tally. So this month I read 12 books by 13 authors. 7 are female, 5 male, 1 non-binary, 10 were white, 1 was Asian, and 2 were Latinx indigenous. So that's my kind of statistics on my authors for this month. So I was kind of trying to figure out how I wanted to present this. This is my first video. How would I do my wrap up? Should I do it in the order that I read it? Favorite to least favorite? What I ended up deciding to do was do my favorites, my least favorites, then everything that was sort of like in the middle. So if you wanted to just, scoot out once I was finished with all my emotions, you could do that. But so that's how I'm gonna do. And if y'all have any other better ideas, if y'all don't like it this way, let me know in the comments. So my favorite book for the month of August was The Lesbiana's Guide to Catholic School by Sonora Reyes. I super loved this book. This is teen YA. It's about Jennette. She's Latinx indigenous, a closeted lesbian, who's going to go to a new Catholic school in Arizona. The backstory, the pre-story, like I said, she's closeted. She went to this public high school, confided in her best friend about her sexuality. Her friend outed her. All the stuff that comes with that. Her brother, Cesaro, was getting into a lot of fights. He's super smart, was getting into a lot of fights. He gets a scholarship to a Catholic school, so he's gonna go there. And she decides, and Jennette convinces her mother to let her go there as well, under the pretense of keeping an eye on her brother, but really just to get a fresh start after what happened in her school. Luckily, it didn't get around that much, so her brother didn't find out, her mom didn't find out, but fresh start. So she ends up going to this school that is mostly white. It's a Catholic school, says it in the title. So very conservative, all that entails with white Catholic high school that you could imagine. And because she's closeted, she's very just in her head all the time. It's first person present, which isn't my favorite, because I feel like as a concept, if it's written down, then it's already happened. So it's very weird for me for present tense. This is one of the situations, like it's still weird, I don't love present tense, but because she's in her head the whole time, talking to herself, try not to act gay. Did I look at the pretty girl too long? Don't do this, don't do that. I feel like that kind of really is helped and supported by the first person present tense. But so she goes to the school and she's, like I said, she's trying to hide herself, trying to make new friends, but can't be completely herself and all that. Then she's also dealing with all these pressures at home. Pre-story, we find out that her father was deported back to Mexico. She hasn't seen him in person in years. They talk on the phone, they FaceTime. She's actually really close to her dad, closer to her dad than her mom. Her mom is really close to her brother. Her mother actually expects a lot of her in the sense of how she deals with her brother. That her mom expects a lot of Jennette in terms of her brother. She expects her to take care of him and to keep an eye on him. Why is he getting into fights in school? Jennette's like, we're not even in the same classroom. How am I supposed to keep him from getting detention? But those are the sort of the expectations. This book was brought to my attention by Jessie from Bow Ties and Books, and they did a YouTube live with one of their best friends, and they were talking about how in Latinx cultures, that is sort of kind of the standard, that the mothers are obsessed with the sons, and there's so much put onto the daughters to like care for the sons, and that's a lot of pressure. So all that rings true. I went to an evangelical elementary school. I went to a Catholic high school. I am straight, I am white, but all of that rings true. And I went 20 years ago. I don't know, I can't speak on how those experiences would be now, but that probably definitely is how those experiences would be at least 20 years ago, the way they are kind of portrayed in this book. There are some trigger warnings probably needed here. The author does put them in the front of the book. Racism, homophobia, violence toward LGBT people, suicidal ideation, I feel like there were a couple more. It's in the very beginning of the book, you can't miss it. This is Sonora Reyes' first book. I'm really excited to see what they come up with later, because this was really good. It felt really real. It's someone who is straight and can't relate to being LGBT. I still felt her. Yamala, her brother at some point tells her she has a crush on a girl at school, and her brother's like, crushes are supposed to be fun. You should be having fun with your crush. And I was like, have I been doing crushes wrong my entire life? When I was in high school, like, I felt like when I was that age, I didn't want like, it was very much in that same spirit that I didn't want the crush to know I had a crush on them. And so it was all just agony, because you're like, oh no, don't look at them too long. You don't want them to know. Why I don't want them to know? Because you think you would. You'd want to go out with the person, blah, blah, blah. But I don't know. But so I felt her angst, and I felt just that relatable teenager stuff. And that's what's so great about like representation. I mean, it's been said before, it's nothing new, but representation is so valuable, and you get Latinx, Indigenous representation here, immigrant story here. There's also some adoption stuff. There's a bead player character who is Asian, adopted by a white family, and the stuff that entails. Learning about your culture when your parents are not that culture, etc., etc. I can't help but compare this book to I Kissed Sherry Wheeler by Casey McQuiston. It follows that same basic story. Two LGBT people are going to a Christian private high school. Kind of starts at the beginning of the year, ends essentially at graduation. It follows that same path. I enjoyed The Lesbiana's Guide to Catholic School so much better. The other one, it's essentially a ripoff of John Green's Paper Towns. I'm not really okay with that. And I have other things to say. I'm going to make a separate video about that, about the comparison of the two, but I would go with this one. I was saying about representation, I kind of tangented a little bit, that representation is so important because to see people different from you and how you can relate. So even though she's closeted and in her head and super angsty about liking a girl, I could relate to that in being super angsty about liking to a boy when I was in high school. And I mean, I'm 30 something years old, like, we're past that. But it's still like, you know, kids in high school, like, even though you're different, and you may be very different, or maybe a little different, you always can find something to relate to. But I highly recommend 5 stars. So my next favorite book of the month was I'm Glad My Mom Died by Jennette McCurdy. I know everyone's kind of talking about this book. You probably don't. Sorry, that is a massive plane flying past my window. So you probably don't need me to tell you about it. It's been everywhere. She's been on all the talk shows. Everybody kind of knows about this book. But I'll just give a very quick rundown. Jennette McCurdy was the sidekick character on the Nickelodeon show iCarly that I only watched maybe 2 episodes of because my name's Carly and the character's iCarly, and so I watched it because I was curious, but I was kind of too old for it. A few years ago, for years, the internet's been whispering that the creator of the show is a creepy dirtbag, Dan Schneider. It kind of came out more publicly a couple years ago. She started talking about it, and her experience as an actor in Hollywood, her mom was a stage mom, that like hardcore psycho kind of stage mom. She didn't want to act. They had this very kind of codependent relationship. And she acted because she thought it would make her mom happy. This does have kind of all the trigger warnings: sexual abuse, mental abuse, eating disorders. There's a little bit of mental health stuff in there. I do feel like I should say, if you're going into this for the dirt about Dan Schneider, you're not really gonna get it. It's kind of touched upon a little bit, but that's not what the book's about. The book's just really about her relationship with her mother. And when her mother got sick and she passed away a couple years ago, and she just came to realize that her life is so much better without her mom there, without that codependent relationship, without her feeling that she had to live up to all these expectations that her mom had, or to live to make her mother happy. She gets to live for herself now. And that's kind of the core of the story. I listened to this on audio. I thought it was great. She reads it, of course. It's very dry. The chapters are super short. So I mentioned in my welcome video that I don't really read nonfiction. I do celebrity memoirs a little bit, but I don't generally read nonfiction, so I've been trying to do it all on audio. And it's still not my favorite thing. It's just a better way for me to take in information instead of just not taking it in at all. And I actually was putting down physical books to listen to this. I never do that. I never not read a physical book to listen to an audiobook, and I was doing that with this. I flew through it in a way that I don't usually fly through audiobooks. It does sort of describe in the description that it's really funny. And I was reading some comments and reviews from other people on Goodreads. People are like, it's not funny. And I'd have to agree with that it's not funny in that like haha way. It's a story about terrible things that happened to this girl when she was a child. Like, it's not a funny haha story. I think the funny, or maybe you might get a funny thing that comes in, is that in how she reads the story and how she tells the story. Her word choices, her sentence structures, like it's very dry and kind of sardonic. And I think that gives a vibe of maybe being funny, but I would not go into this thinking this is gonna be a laugh riot, you know? But still, absolutely loved it, 5 stars. My last favorite book of the month is Vera Kelly Is Not a Mystery by Rosalie Knecht. I don't know how to pronounce her last name. This is the second in a series. The first is Who is Vera Kelly? And there's one more. I think it's just the 3, we'll see. I will probably do a video on all 3 once I finish the 3rd, which is on my September TBR, because this series is quickly becoming a favorite. I don't know why it's not really getting BookTube, Bookstagram, Book Talk like love, because I kind of love it. And I'm not even gonna say it's like, oh my god, this is the best book I've ever read, but I don't know, it kind of warms me a little bit in a weird way. It's not even typically like a warm story. I don't know, I feel like these are gonna be my new favorite books that I'm just gonna tell people they should be reading. So I feel like I have to give you a little bit of backstory on the first book to get into this book, but Vera Kelly in the first book is a spy for the CIA in the 1960s during the Argentinian coup. Like, yes, please, give me more historical fiction about stuff I had never heard of. Like, there's so much on World War II, there's so much about so much stuff that there's certain topics that we just have a plethora. Too much. We have so much about certain topics. And then some topics we have barely any at all. And I'm like, the Argentinian coup, I don't know anything about that, tell me more. And Vera Kelly's LGBT, it's a spy novel, but it feels like a spy novel in the way that maybe spies actually are, where there's a lot of listening to microphone taps and a lot of nothing happening. And it's not this like shoot 'em up James Bond spy novel. It's not that. We're not doing that. And then that's the first book. And in the second book, we kind of divert into she decides to become a private detective. She's a woman in the late 1960s. That's hard. And she's just kind of getting into like stalking wayward wives husbands are like, can you find out what my wife's doing? Is she with another man? Yada, yada. And this one sort of is about the Civil War that happened in the Dominican Republic in the late 1960s. Yay, more new history that I'm not aware of. Love that. But so the story is that you have this well-to-do Dominican Republic family, and they're on kind of the wrong side of the Civil War, or the people that are taking over, the dictators that are coming in, they're on the wrong side of that. And they're able to sneak their child off to America under an assumed name that no one knows but them. The parents go missing, and it's this boy's aunt and uncle who go to Vera and are like, can you find our nephew? The person that he ended up with passed away. He's now like in the system. We don't know his name, so we can't find him. We haven't seen him in a couple of years. We kind of have this one picture. Can you find him? And so she takes that up. And I can't really tell you any more about that because then that will ruin the story. But it's also, I said, she's LGBT. It's the 60s. I kind of think the third book's going to deal with Stonewall. That's just a guess. I don't 100% know that. But when she's not traveling for cases, she's lived in New York City. She goes to gay bars. You get gay bar raids. Like in the second book. So I'm like, oh, I can only imagine that's where we're ending up. We're going to Stonewall. But it's about like her ending a relationship, kind of trying to find a new relationship, trying to learn how to be open in a relationship. Because she's LGBT, she feels the need, in the 60s, she feels needs to be like very closed off. And then being a spy, you're closed off. You're always kind of lying. You never can tell your partner your job. You never can tell. So her whole life is sort of this closed off being. And so it's very hard for her to be open in a relationship, you know? And so it's about that. And I don't know, like I'm never gonna be like, this is like, oh, the best book of all time. But there's something about it that I love. I've looked, I cannot find out if the author is LGBT herself, but I don't know, it feels like really true to that experience it feels really true to what I imagine that experience to be, which doesn't mean anything, I'm straight. But I don't know, I really love it. I think the story's great, I like the character. She feels like an honest character. I like the historical fiction of it. I don't know, it just kind of ticks all my boxes, and it kind of ticks boxes that I didn't really even know I had. But I really love it. It's like a good 4.5 stars, you know? So now we're gonna get into my worst books. Luckily there was only one. I'm probably gonna make a separate video on it because I have a lot of feelings about it. But it's The Couch Potato by Jory, John, and Pete Oswald. It is a picture book. It's meant for like 5-year-olds, I guess. I don't know. Have Hoopla with your library. It's like an app that's sort of like Libby, but they have other stuff. One day I was scrolling through Hoopla and they had a bunch of picture books, and I was like, I'm kind of in a picture book mood. I used to work at Barnes & Noble in the kids section. I love picture books. So I kind of had a picture book moment. And I know this is part of a series where there's like the bad seed, and where it's a seed who's bad. But I haven't read the other ones in the series. And I went on Goodreads, and granted, this has a lot of good reviews, like a lot. But I was reading some of the negative ones because I disliked it, I already said. To see what other people had to say. And a lot of people said, not a lot, but other people did agree that this is probably the least, that this is very much not as good as the rest. But as I said, I'm gonna make another video, so I'll try to make it quick. I have feelings. And I'm probably overthinking it, but I don't really care. But, so The Couch Potato, it's about a potato that likes to hang out on his couch. And he plays video games all the time, and he watches TV all the time, and he plays video games with his friend that's on his phone, and he's just very much like, he has 7 TVs on the screen, so you can watch all of his programs at once, and it's just very much, he never goes outside, he never does anything. And I will say, the art's cute. Heavy big props to the art. That may be the only star this gets is the art. But this is such heavy-handed, ham-fisted moralizing of don't be lazy on your couch, go outside and play. And I don't understand who this book is for, because it's a very really simplistic picture book. This is for 4-year-old, 5-year-old, 6-year-olds. And 4-year-old, 5-year-old, 6-year-olds don't get to make the decisions of whether they can walk their dog down the street in their neighborhood. Your parents make those decisions. or riding your bicycle with your best friend down a bridge in like your big city life. Like, I get the impression this takes place in Seattle because some of the illustrations kind of imply that. That's not happening. And so if this is not directed at 4, 5, 6-year-olds, or maybe your 10-year-old might have the permission to do that, this book isn't for them. So I don't know who this book is for. And if it's for an adult, it doesn't feel like it's for an adult. And it doesn't feel like satire really either. And so I just don't understand. I don't understand who it's for. And it very much feels like boomer privilege BS that I don't know, it just doesn't work for me. It doesn't make sense for me. It's also very, their ideas of what makes you a couch potato. So like video games, TV watching, couch potato. But reading a book isn't a couch potato. That's not even brought up. If you were to stay on your couch for 18 hours a day, reading a book, that's not working out. That's not seeing the sun, all the things or hanging out with friends and socializing, all the things that it mentions to do. As to like not be a couch potato, or just as bad if you're reading or sitting and knitting or, you know, anything like that. Like it's very much like their idea of what are bad habits. And it does sort of say in the end, like there's a compromise, like you don't have to give all that up. But I always just have a personal pet peeve of that. Yeah, everything in moderation. Absolutely, of course. But it sort of makes it like video games are just all bad. And I'm like, I feel like I never played video games. I wasn't allowed, so I'm not good at them. I've tried, I'm terrible at them, so I just quit. So I don't really know, but I'm just like, aren't video games great for like motor skills and problem solving? And I consume a lot of TV. I'm not gonna pretend I don't. I consume a lot of TV. And granted, like when I was a kid, like I watched a lot of TV. And even as a kid, I read all the time. The amount of books I consumed was ridiculous, but I also watched a lot of TV. And I was basically, before I knew what fan fiction was, I was fan fictioning in my head about shows that I watched, and I would like insert myself into Growing Pains. And I was like, oh, what sibling would I be? And you know, and blah, blah, blah. I would write myself into stories. And I just feel like there's a lot of like parenting that you can do that involves that. Like if you're watching a TV show, oh, what story would you write that fits into this world? You know, like there are ways that you can incorporate that stuff into storytelling and into involving your mind and it not just be a brain dead thing. I don't know, it just felt just like, what if you live in a bad neighborhood and you can't just go out? What if your parents are paranoid and are afraid you're gonna get kidnapped off the street? Like what if you live in a neighborhood that has no kids? I grew up in a neighborhood that had no kids. Like, it was just me and my sister, and my mom was paranoid we were gonna get kidnapped off the street. Like, so we rode our bikes. We had a long driveway. My mom had this fence put in, and when we played outside, we closed the fence so we could only play in part of our driveway. And then we opened the fence when we went back inside so we wouldn't get kidnapped. Like, the things that it is telling kids to do, kids have no control over. The age that this is directed to, they have no control over. And I found this just like so annoyingly privileged boomer nonsense. And I just don't like it. Like I would just skip it. I've heard the other ones are better. Maybe go read those. I don't know. I just didn't like it. Okay, so now I'm on to the books that I liked, I had a good time with. You know, I read Sandman, Volume 1, Preludes and Nocturnes by Neil Gaiman. So I just watched, my husband and I watched Netflix's Sandman, Season 1, and super loved it. I'm aware of Sandman. I was aware of Sandman for a long time. I've just never read it. I'm not a huge graphic novelist person. It's a me problem, not a them problem. It's just I just want to read the story. Like, I don't want to sit and look at the pictures and like figure out the artwork of what's going on. I really just want to read the story. And then a lot of times I find graphic novel art just to be a little grotesque in the style in a way that I don't love. So it's a me problem. So most of the time, the only time I read graphic novels is to compare them to the show that I loved. So loved the show, wanted to see how it compared. I knew they sort of changed some of the races of the characters and some of the genders, but I didn't really know which ones they were doing that for, and so I wanted to read the book and see, and just as a curiosity, as a comparison lesson, And just as I love adaptation, like my dream job in like college and high school was to take children's books, adapt them into movies, like just adaptation and doing that well. I always find fascinating, and I really get annoyed when it's not adapted well. So I just really wanted to see how it was adapted. Sandman, it's been around forever, everybody probably knows what it is. Oh, and this is based off of the first, this volume that I read, volume 1, is the first 8 issues of this long-running graphic novel series. But Sandman is, he's sometimes kind of like a god, he's not really a god, but he's kind of the ruler of dreams, of sleep. And he's got some siblings, I'm not really sure if they're like have the same mother. I don't know, like were they birthed from the ether? Like we don't know, it hasn't been explained. But his siblings are death, desire, etc., etc. So Sandman, he's also known as Morpheus or Dream. At the beginning of the story, Morpheus is kidnapped by this kind of magician guy around the 1920s. And the magician guy was trying to kidnap Death, wanting to bring back his son from the dead, but accidentally kidnapped this guy. Took all of his tools. He's got like these tools that he uses to control Dreamland or whatever. Takes them. Over time, they get dispersed all over the world to different people. Eventually Dream escapes. And kind of these first 8 issues are him going around trying to get these tools back. And then the last book, sort of like the last issue is once he gets these kind of tools back, what does he do with his life now? And sort of reorganizing the planet back to where it should be because it went into disarray when he was kidnapped. So I really enjoyed this. I really enjoyed this from like a study of adaptation. It's not super my cup of tea. It does feel like Neil Gaiman, like the dialogue, it's really early Neil Gaiman work, but it feels like Neil Gaiman. I think I said earlier I'm not a super big fan of graphic novel art in general, but I really enjoyed it. If you like that sort of thing, I mean, most people probably have already read it. I came into it purely because of the show, which I love, and I highly recommend. I give it 3.75 stars. My next book, This Hurts Me, was A Magic Steeped in Poison by Judy I. Lin. This was one of my more anticipated books of the year. I was super excited for it, and I just really struggle bust with it, and I really wish I didn't. It's a first of a duology. The second one's already out. It's on my TBR for September. That's actually what I'm currently reading as of this recording, and I'm struggle busting with that one too. Really don't want to DNF. It feels like I should, but I'm gonna fight through it. But the story, it's gorgeous cover. Gorgeous cover. And the story's really interesting. I'm just having a really hard time sinking my teeth into the story. Like, the overall plot, I guess, is what's interesting, but it's like the characters aren't there. There's no descriptions. I have no idea what our main character name looks like. I'm like, is she short? Is she tall? Is she skinny? Is she a bit thicker? Like, no concept. Well, let's get into the story. So, it's a fantasy. It's YA fantasy. It takes place in like an alter universe China. It's called, I don't know, I'm gonna get pronunciation wrong, I apologize. I think they're calling it Doxy. It's essentially China, but they're calling it the Empire of Doxy. Part of this fantastical reality that's within the story is that you have that certain people are born with a skill to use tea as magic. And it can be like any tea, but they can like commune with the tea in a way that when they drink it, or they can like get the drinker, the other person who's going to drink the tea, they can drink it and they can be imbued with a strength or a power, or like not so much like a superhero power, not like Captain America or something, but like a focus, and if they're really, really strong and powerful, they can do some mind manipulation and things like that. And it's sort of considered equal with medical science, academia science, but also treated very suspiciously and compared to academia science. And you can be born with the talent for this thing, for this manipulation of tea magically, but you need to be trained to become really, really good at it. And she was learning, her mother was trained in the magic of this tea, and her father is a medical physician. And they needed her to be an assistant to her father. They live in this small village. He's the village doctor. She needed to learn from him, and they're training their younger daughter in the ways of the magical tea. The poison tea blocks, there's tea, they're poisoned, people drink them, they're dying. Pre-story, her mother dies from this, her sister gets really sick. She uses what little skills she has to kind of make her sister just not die. She's still very sick, but won't die. So while this is going on in the main like city where like the emperor lives and whatnot, they're trying to get a new Shang-Shi, and that's like the master of the masters of this skill. And they're gonna hold a competition. Hunger Games style, but not like death. But you're gonna come, and then they're gonna have challenges, and it narrows it down and down and down, and whoever wins gets to be the new Shang-Shi. And with that comes like a reward, a request. And so the only reason Ning wants this is so she can request all the best doctors in Shang-Shi and the kingdom to come and heal her sister. So she runs, she kind of like disregards her father, runs to this main city and takes part in this challenge. And then once she's there, she realizes this whole society is not what she thought it was. This whole society is not really what she thought it was going to be. It's full of political court intrigue. No one can trust anybody. She can't trust anybody. Thank God she does actually realize that. No one has seen the emperor in ages. They claim that he's sick. Some people think he's really dead. Some people are whispering that his daughter, who's being sort of the face of the empire, is really like puppet ruling. Blah, 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 blah. There's also this sort of romance. She gets to go to town to pick up some stuff for a challenge. She meets this boy. They kind of have an intense moment. I heard some people calling it instant love. I don't read enough romance. It didn't feel like instant love to me, but maybe it was. It doesn't feel like enough of the story for me to say like this was a romance story. And also they're teenagers. If they have feelings for each other, let them have feelings for each other. But as the story progresses, we realize he's really the son of like the emperor's exiled brother. And they've been in some podunk town where all the like exiles and the bandits and kind of the prisoner people are sent to. And so now the emperor, they catch him and they're like, oh God, well, he's here. Is he going to try to overthrow stuff? Blah, blah, blah. Whether she's trying to figure out whether or not she can trust him. Because she's been in his head sort of because of this tea. She doesn't know if she can trust. She says she thinks she can trust him, but she doesn't really know. People don't really. It's a lot of politics. It's a lot of court intrigue. And it sounds really interesting. And like the actual like story, like, I'm sure if this was like a story outline, it would be like, wow, this is really cool. But I'm having such a hard time just like getting into it. And the problem, as I said earlier, it's a duology. It just ends. Like, you can't just pretend this is one book, I finished it, I'm done, I never have to touch it. This is 2 books split down the middle. Like, it just ends with no resolution. You have to read the second one to pick up on, like, to know what happens. So that's where we are. I'm not gonna say, like, don't read it. It's actually kind of pretty. Like, some of the sentences are really pretty. There are these little thoughts and moments about memory and death and, like, her missing her mother. And some of that stuff's really, really pretty. It's So I think I went on Goodreads, and when I'm struggling with the book and I'm not 100% sure why I'm struggling with the book, I'll go to Goodreads and read the 1 and 2 star reviews. And this is generally well reviewed, so I'm kind of on the outskirts on this. But most of the 1 and 2 star reviews, people just said, oh, I didn't like it, it wasn't for me. They had no real reason. And somebody said, the pacing's off. It's the pacing. And I was like, that actually might be it. Because the author does this thing where Ning will be in a situation and someone will say something to her, and then she might respond, and then we might get a page of her thinking. Like maybe that response caused her to think about some memory that doesn't really have anything to do with anything. Memory. And then we come back to the sentence, like the next sentence in her response to this situation. And it's like, oh, can we just like resolve this little situation? And then you have the memory. It feels like it takes forever to get anything done. It's not a small book, so it almost feels like not a lot happens. It feels like I'm manipulated into thinking a lot happens, but not a lot happens. I don't know. I think the pacing might be off, and that's exactly what I think it could just be with that the pacing's off. And I'm not saying don't read it. A lot of people on Goodreads like it. I think it's a me thing. I don't necessarily think it's a me thing. I think the pacing is kind of weird, but a lot of people like it, so I'm not going to say don't read it. But I'm giving it 3 stars. Next book is The Marlow Murder Club by Robert Thorogood. And you know what? So I enjoyed this. I think what happened while I was reading it, I was distracted by other shiny new books, and we were watching The Sandman while I was trying to read this. And I'm like, now I have to read The Sandman. So I'm kind of reading. I'm not a good multitasker book reader. I really should just read one at a time. I'm not good at reading other stuff. And I just really wanted to read Sandman. And then I found out about the first book I mentioned, The Lesbiana Secret Guide to Catholic School. Not secret. Lesbiana's Guide to Catholic School, and I just wanted to read that, and I was like, no, you gotta finish this, and so I was really wanting to read other stuff, and I think it just put me in a mood, but I enjoyed this. I thought it was good, and it was fun. So this book starts off right away. We get our dead body right away, and Judith Potts is our lead. She's like 70 years old, eccentric lady, lives in a nice house in this town called Marlow that actually exists. I googled it. She swims naked in the Thames every night. She's the sort of person that everyone in the town knows. Every time she meets people, they're like, and she's like, oh, I'm Judith Potts. And they're like, oh, I know who you are. And she's like, you do? She has no idea how known she is in the town. One of her neighbors gets murdered, and she decides she's gonna solve it. Because at the beginning, the police don't realize what's happening. Things were a little, I don't want to spoil it, but things were just a little confused in the beginning. And she's like, no, this is murder. So she's going to solve this murder. And Judith sort of collects a team of women. She is joined by the vicar's wife, Bex. She's very, like, kind of OCD, very proper, early 30s. Probably, because her children are older. And in my head, she's younger, but she's probably maybe, like, early to mid 40s. But very Lululemon, kind of like that vibe. Also never intended to be a vicar's wife. When she got married to her husband, he was an accountant or a dentist or something, I can't remember. And then he gets saved or something and becomes a vicar, and she's now a vicar's wife, whether she wanted to be or not. And also Judith is joined by Susie, who's this like salt of the earth, probably late 50s, early 60s dog walker, like salt of the earth woman. Probably has gotten a little bit maybe arrested by the police herself a time or two kind of person. And also the detective who's on the case, Tanika, I believe is her name. They sort of joined together to kind of solve this case. And I mean, I can't really tell you a bunch more without getting into the case and the mystery. My issue with this was at the very beginning, Judith is convinced that a certain person committed the crime. I will not tell you whether or not this certain person committed the crime, but she is very convinced that they did, but then immediately gets proof that this person did not. It is like open and shut case, this proof. And she hangs on to that for way too long. And I wish we had gotten a little bit quicker of, okay, well, this is what the evidence says, but maybe did this person hire somebody? Did they doctor up the evidence? Did they, like, how could the evidence be wrong? We didn't touch that I'm not sure we ever really touched that. It went to other angles, but it was never, she just hung on to the fact that this person had to have done it, even though the evidence said they didn't. I also thought the author, and I don't know if it's because he's a man or what, but he kind of made the other two characters, Liz and Susie, I keep calling her Liz, and Bex and Susie, to be kind of dumb. Like, Judith would say something, and they would go, what does that mean? And she would have to explain it, and they'd be like, oh, that's so smart. And it wasn't the most brilliant thing ever. Like, it wasn't like, oh, I didn't know what she was saying, and it was like a series of unfortunate events situation where, like, I'm gonna say a word. What's the word? I'll explain the word. That's sort of what it felt like, but I'm like, we're all regular adults here. Like, we should know what these words mean. These weren't spelling bee, ESPN spelling bee words. Like, it felt like we're just dumbifying women for no reason at all. I don't know. I see a lot of people comparing it to the Thursday Murder Club, and I don't really know why. Is it just because they're old people in England? Like, I mean, so is Hercule Poirot and Miss Marple, and we don't see those comparisons. Like, I don't really see the comparison outside of that. They came out kind of around the same time, and they're just old people. I think Thursday Murder Club is funnier. I think it's also more in depth into, like, what human nature is. And this is just sort of like a fun mystery. Now I'm going to get into spoilers. And so I'm going to put up a graphic, I'll tell you my spoilers, and then I'll put up a graphic when I'm done. And then you can kind of fast forward through that, because I don't want to ruin anything for you. So spoiler, spoiler, spoiler. This is Strangers on the Train. It's Strangers on the Train 3 ways. I don't like that. Well, it's not that I don't like that. It's that no one mentions that it's Strangers on a Train 3 ways. If you haven't seen Alfred Hitchcock's Strangers on a Train, it's two people, they meet on a train, they kind of figure out they each hate somebody in their life, and if they bump them off, they'll know it's them. And they're like, well, how about we each bump the other person off? That's what this book is, except it's 3. So it's kind of Strangers on a Train and Strangers on a Train and a triangle. And Judith Potts is 70 years old. She has seen Strangers on a Train. This book is written by a guy who writes teleplays for TV shows in England. He has seen this movie. They've all seen this movie. And I'm really annoyed that no one went, oh, the end result is Strangers on a Train. I don't mind that he did it. I mean, we have so many mysteries now that everybody's doing everything. It doesn't really matter. Just that no one referenced it, and it's really obvious. Like, if you've seen the movie, it's a thing. So that really bothered me. Spoiler, spoiler, spoiler. We're done. We're done with my spoiler. So I liked it. I will definitely read the second one. I know that there's supposed to be another one. The crossword puzzle doesn't really have a ton to do with it. She does a crossword puzzle as sort of like her side job, or as her part-time job. That's where the crossword puzzle comes in. It's not a huge thing. It's fun. It's got its quirks. There's a twist in the end. Well, there's a twist. There's a twist that isn't really the main mystery case. There's a twist. I don't love the twist. And it has nothing to do with this. It's more like character development twist. Don't love it. Don't love it. Don't hate it. It's just sort of like, I felt like it was just very unnecessary to our story. I'm giving it 3.65 is what I'm giving it. We're gonna finesse those numbers. 3.65 for the Marlow Murder Club. So the next book I'm going to talk about is How to Be Perfect by Michael Schur. The whole actual title is How to Be Perfect, the correct answer to every moral question. So Michael Schur is the guy who wrote Parks and Rec, but in pertinence to this book, he wrote the show The Good Place with Ted Danson and Kristen Bell. I don't know if you've seen it. If you haven't, finish this video, go find Peacock or Netflix or wherever it is, and watch The Good Place. It's chef's kiss. The show is essentially a sitcom about moral philosophy and ethics. I won't get into it because it ruins the whole show. This book, Michael Schur says in the intro, was sort of all the lessons he learned when he was trying to teach himself moral philosophy so he could write this show. And so it's not, you're like, oh, I want to know the dirt or the inside scoop on the making of The Good Place, this is not that. It's not. It's really an intro, like a really kind of down and dirty intro into just moral philosophy and ethics. That's what it is. I don't know how to rate this. If I had to, I listened to it on audio, which is great. It's how I would recommend listening to or consuming it. If I had to read this physically, I would not have gotten past maybe the first 2 pages of the actual book, because I can't do nonfiction. I cannot do philosophy. I took an intro class in college because I had to, and it was a nightmare. What was kind of cool about this is that he had almost the entire cast from The Good Place reading bits and pieces. Ted Danson did the intro. He did all the chapter titles. But the rest of the cast, you would have, if he would sort of maybe have a conversation or, oh, someone said this, one of them would jump in and say a thing. And it was really great to hear their voices. It kind of did a little twist for me, like to hear it, like as an audio breakup. Again, I don't know how to rate it because it's a nonfiction, almost like intro textbook. It's not an intro textbook. We're not going to pretend Michael Schur is an expert in moral philosophy and ethics, but it's a book about moral philosophy and ethics. I have no idea if what he's saying is good or bad or accurate. It's like, it's really hard to recommend, or it's really hard to like rate. So I don't know, but it took me forever to get through this, even on audio. I rewound it a lot because I drifted, but it's fun. It's not fun, but I feel like I learned some stuff. It was cool. You know, that's where we are. So the next 4 books I'm going to talk about are all picture books. They're the last ones I'm going to talk about. We're going to speed through them. I don't know. I just kind of read 4 or 5 picture books in a row. And I'm counting them because they are books. But I read There's a Tiger in the Garden by Lizzy Stewart. And this was charming. It's very clearly British. It's sweet. It's this little girl. She's being taken care of by her grandmother, like probably for the afternoon or something. The little girl's tired of all the stuff her grandmother's asked, like, all the little games they're playing, the little girl's done with it. And the grandma's like, go out in the garden. There's a tiger out there, and there's a polar bear, and there's, you know, she's like naming all these things. And the little girl's just like, Grandma, you know, there's no polar bear in the garden. And she's like, I don't know, you should go and see. You should go and see if there's a polar bear in the garden. And she goes, and it's basically a story of imagination, and, you know, the tiger's really an orange cat, and, you know, it's just cute. It's cute, it's charming, it's sweet. I enjoyed it. Get it from the library, read it to your kids. It was cute. The illustrations were cute. The whole thing was cute. Then I came across, I feel like I'm really like missed the boat on this one. Then I came across Flora and the Peacocks and Flora and the Flamingo, both by Molly Idle. And Flora and the Flamingo is a Caldecott honor book. So that one I think was first, and then the other one, but I came to it backwards. And I think there's a few other in the series, but I just read the first 2. They're not actually like, there are no words in this book. It's purely illustrative. It's purely illustrative, which I kind of enjoy. I always, like, if I had kids, it would be like a fun, like, tell me the story, what do you think's happening? It's a great way to get your kids, like, into your books and have them use their imaginations with pictures. But essentially it's a little girl, and Flora and the Flamingo, she's wearing like a little bathing suit and a little swim cap, and I can't remember who's doing it first, but either the Flamingo is doing a position and she mimics the position, and that's basically the whole book, is them mimicking each other's, like, positions, and they're kind of like yoga dance moves, you know, they're doing weird things. And then the peacock, it's 2 peacocks and they're doing the same thing. They're just mimicking each other's positions the whole way through. That's it. They're both really cute, as they're what they are. They're just really cute. I don't know how often you could go through them if it's a story that you could pick up over and over and over again with your kids, but they're cute. They're cute. And the last thing I'm going to talk about is All the Way to Havana by Margaret Engle. And I picked this kind of purely by the illustrations, and it takes place in Cuba. And the illustrations, once I opened the book, weren't what I thought they were going to be. They're fine. They're fine. I just didn't. I wasn't like, illustrations, they're gorgeous. You know, it wasn't that. They were fine. And then the story ended up being just a poem. It's just a poem that has been illustrated. Not really my deal. I'm not a huge poetry person, even if it's meant for like 4-year-olds, but the kind of the story is that Cuba because of Cuba and their relationship with America and our relationship with them, is that they can't get new cars. And so they have just these really old cars, and because they can't get new cars and they're constantly sort of breaking, they're constantly like having to fix their cars and maybe taking bits of other cars to make these cars, to make their current car, taking bits of an older car and adding it to this car to fix the car. There's an illustrator's note in the back that I thought was actually really interesting, that when he went to get art ideas, is that you couldn't necessarily identify the models of cars, because you would be like, oh, that's a 57 Chevy on a 52 Ford. Like, I don't know. But you know what I mean? Like, they're just, it's almost like Frankenstein cars a little bit, because that's how you get the things to work. That's kind of your nuts and bolts of the story, but it's this little boy helping his dad fix this truck, and they go to visit their like family in town, hang out for the day, and go back home. That's the story. It's a poem. And so it's very like sound effects of like a car starting, and it wasn't really my deal. It's cute, especially I think if you have like a kid that loves cars and maybe like helping whoever fixes the cars in your household, like this could be really up your kid's alley. It just wasn't up my alley. But I'm not gonna be like, no, don't read it. It wasn't terrible. It didn't make me angry like the couch potato or anything. It just wasn't, it wasn't for me. So those are my books for August. Thanks for joining me. I hope you liked my video. If you have any thoughts, comments, feelings that don't go along with me, or if you agree with me, please leave me a comment and like and subscribe. I would love that. And if you have any suggestions on how I could do this better, also leave a comment. But thanks for joining me. I'll see you later.